Hello, good afternoon, class. Today we're going to be going over the chapter 15, organizational culture and organizational change. What is organizational culture? Organizational culture is a system of shared values, norms, and assumptions. They're made up of formal and informal practices. It guides members' attitudes and behaviors and influences how they perceive and react to their environment. It's taken for granted by existing members, which taken for granted you might think sounds like a negative aspect, but honestly is the ultimate goal of leaders when trying to get their employees to adopt to a certain behavior. You want to make sure that it's something they don't think about. And it's taught to new members as they're socialized into the group. Of course, new members aren't going to know the organizational culture immediately. It's going to have to be taught to them over time. Now, why does organizational culture matter? Now, as stated by researcher Edgar Schein, organizational culture is the key to organizational excellence, and the function of leadership is the creation and management of culture. Now, there's a picture of Edgar Schein there for you, for those that are following the PowerPoint. When culture is managed correctly, organizations and employees are more likely to deliver on strategic objectives in the long run. Of course, you have to manage it effectively. It can be managed in an inappropriate manner, which could be a downfall for the organization in the long run. If an organization's business strategy and corporate culture conflict, usually culture is going to win out every time. Now, culture as an organizational performance booster, that's the main reason, obviously, any manager would want to use a culture of some type to reinforce behaviors, because it will enhance the performance of the employees. Now, in order to do so, you need to make sure it's strategically relevant, it's strong, it emphasizes innovation, and emphasizes change. How a culture is managed really determines whether or not it's going to enhance organizational performance, of course. It can be used for good or bad. Ensure that the culture is strategically relevant. Obviously, you wouldn't want your nuclear engineers at the power plant wearing board shorts and sandals to work. You want to make sure that they're making a good first impression and they're suited for the job that they're doing. You want to focus upon innovation and, of course, support adaptation and change from within the firm. Certain companies, such as Kmart, were unable to support adaptation and change as a culture. As a whole, they didn't adapt to the digital landscape that the marketplace is in now, and that's a good example of how the improper culture could be harmful to an organization. Now, there's 4 levels of culture: artifacts, assumptions, espoused values, and enacted values. Now, what those actually are, the artifacts are physical manifestations of the culture, including myths and stories. Stories that could be, passed down, said from years ago that couldn't even be true, may affect how employees perceive the firm and how it affects their attitudes at work. Awards and ceremonies and rituals, and of course a dress code. Assumptions taken for granted. Not exactly a bad thing. Again, you want to make sure that the employees who are effectively accepting the culture are making the assumptions which you want them to make for the culture to work. Make sure it's unconscious, and it's the ultimate source of values and behaviors. It's where our values and behaviors come from. Espoused values are explicitly stated organizational values. They're the values that you'll see on the poster on the wall, that the manager will speak directly to you and tell you what they wish for you to do. Enacted values are norms and behaviors actually exhibited by the employees, not necessarily the ones. They might be the right ones, and in that sense, then the culture has taken hold in the correct way. If they're showing enacted values that don't display the culture that you're trying to reinforce, then you want to make sure that you're reinforcing those values correctly. Leaders, they're the architects and the mechanics of culture. They build it and they maintain it. They shape and maintain effective organizational culture in a few ways. The leader should define the culture and support the business strategy with that culture. They should consistently behave in ways that demonstrates the culture, lead by example, effectively explain the culture to employees so that they understand why it is critical, and also hold him or herself accountable for maintaining the culture in which they wish to reinforce. Now, how leaders influence organizations' cultures, and effective leaders should develop a clear sense of mission and values about what the company should be. They should select employees who can share, express, and reinforce the desired values. Use daily routines and concrete actions and behaviors to demonstrate and exemplify appropriate values and beliefs. Make a habit of it. Not all habits are bad. There can be good habits, such as brushing your teeth. So make sure that these daily routines are put in place, that the employees accept the culture almost without knowing it. Consistently role model behaviors that reinforce the culture. Again, another example of leading by example. Make your human resource management procedures and criteria consistent. You don't want to offer information that is inconsistent. This will show employees that it's okay to not have everything together in the correct manner, that reinforce a culture of impunctuality, and you definitely don't want that. You want to nurture traditions and rituals that express, define, and reinforce the culture. There's two primary types of culture. You have cultures of conflict and cultures of inclusion. Now, they're not completely different in which they both can be part of one organization. But cultures of conflict, they're basically shared norms for managing conflict, which reflect different degrees of active versus passive and agreeable versus disagreeable conflict management norms. How do they handle their conflicts? Is it in a... there's a few different ways of doing that. We're going to go into that a little more in depth in the next slide. The culture of inclusion reflects the extent to which the majority members value efforts to increase minority representation and whether the qualifications and abilities of minority members are questioned. In depth, a little more on the culture of conflict here. The different levels of passive conflict management techniques are in the cultures of conflict are active conflict management norms, which the conflict is resolved openly. Passive conflict management norms, in which the leader is avoid addressing the conflict. Agreeable conflict management norms, in which the conflict is resolved in a positive manner, and disagreeable conflict management norms, in which the conflict is resolved in a negative manner or competitively, which isn't exactly negative always, but you want to try to avoid that. Always try to negotiate with the other side to make sure that you're hearing the other side out. Culture of inclusion. Inclusion of minority employees, acknowledgement of religion and beliefs. Religious holidays are granted, consideration of religious beliefs and values when scheduling work hours. With some religions, working more than 40 hours a week is a violation of their beliefs, and that should be respected. That helps to build a culture of trust in the employee towards you, because they know that you're valuing them as an individual as opposed to just another number on the roster. Technology has different effects, some different effects on culture nowadays, for sure. An effective manager should utilize the technology, such as their company's intranet, to establish and reinforce desired culture. Now, a few things about the intranet that make it effective is their scope. The intranet that has a narrow scope can reinforce a culture of secrecy and information hoarding, very closed-minded. But if an intranet contains links to useful resources such as human resources, career development, educational resources, interviews with the company leaders, that helps to reinforce a culture of openness and innovation within the company. And openness to employee feedback and contributions can help to reinforce a participative culture. You can give them the opportunity to give their opinion right there on the intranet. Make that useful for them. The frequency with which an intranet is updated definitely has an effect as well, because if intranets aren't updated frequently, It can lead to reinforcing a culture of poor punctuality and poor attention to detail. Obviously, if they believe the person that's getting paid the big dollars to do the web design isn't doing their job, and top management is okay with that, then your frontline employee is less likely to do the work that you're asking of them with the same type of gusto, so to say. The use of symbols, stories, and ceremonies. Employee recognition helps to show how important each employee is to the firm. Organizational change. Little quote there: "The only thing constant in life is change." That's Francis de la Rochefoucauld, writer. I may have pronounced that correctly. Forces creating a need for change. And you have a few different forces creating a need for change. You have external forces and internal forces. Some of the external forces: increased competition, globalization, changes in consumer demands. You want to make sure you're doing what the consumer needs, or else you can't make your profit. Deregulation and resource shortages. Internal forces that can cause a need for change. Top management believes a change is needed in order to reinforce some strategy that they believe is necessary. Technology changes. Technology changes every year, every day for that matter. And changes in technology, if competition has a hold of it before you do, that could cause a need for change in order to stay current in the market. Slack capacity, budget changes. Of course, they believe budget changes would relate back to scarcity of resources. If your budget expands, that causes a need for change. If the company is going to be effective, increase stockholder share price. And if the budget decreases, of course, that'll cause need for change as well. Talent shortages and growth. There's a four-stage model of the change process: that first, diagnosis, then unfreezing, movement, and refreezing. Phase one in diagnosis, you basically need to understand what needs to change and set clear goals to get that done. Phase two is unfreezing, which prepares people and organizations for the change. Phase three at movement, it's the implementation of the change itself. And then, of course, the last phase is refreezing, which is the institutionalization of the changes into everyday life in the organization. You're making it an unconscious thought, an assumption, so to say, on the employee's part that makes the culture part of their everyday life. Now, there are some barriers to change. Habits, of course, are regular, stable patterns of events that become routines and take time to change. But, of course, you want to reinforce the good habits and penalize the bad habits. And you have power and influence. And, of course, people are likely to resist any change that may threaten or reduce their power or influence. Nobody wants to lose their power or influence. And any change that may affect that, of course, they're going to be less likely to adapt to. Limited resources, insufficient resources such as time, money, expertise. If you don't know how to get the job done, it's hard to do so. Misunderstandings, and because misunderstandings increase uncertainty, they increase the chances that employees won't buy into the need for change. And, of course, fear of the unknown. Now, you can overcome the barriers to change pretty easily. A few ways to do that are through communication, making it clear and stating to the employees often and clearly what the change is and why it's needed, why it's critical to the organization, helps them to adapt and accept the change much more easily. And, of course, it builds support with them as well. Ensuring that staffing and performance appraisals support the change, make sure that reinforces, that will help to reinforce the permanence of the change, because you don't want to give performance appraisals based upon different goals. And negotiation helps to make sure each side is able to give their opinion and make concessions to reach an acceptable change program and acceptance plan. Of course, that helps to build and support a participative culture as well. Incentives, you help to reward employees for supporting, incentives reward employees for supporting and facilitating a change, and of course, enhances their cooperation. Receiving a reward for something is going to reinforce the behavior, and of course, getting penalized is going to hopefully deter that behavior. That brings us to the end of the presentation. And I have a discussion question for this week, and it is, as an employee, have you ever observed an organizational leader actively trying to reinforce a desired organizational culture? And if so, explain what they did and how you believe it affected you. And if you don't believe you've ever seen a leader actively trying to reinforce a desired organizational culture, explain how the absence of that type of direction affected your attitude towards the company that you work for. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I wish you all the best. Happy New Year and happy holidays.